hold a hearing number 4 to amend the council ward boundaries and introduce ordinance to amend the same strategic plan. The legal notice was published in the Orange County Register on August 24th, 26th, La Opinion on August 28th and 31st, Viet on August 27th, 31st, Chinese Daily on August 29th and 31st, and the Korea Times on August 28th, 30th, and on the 31st. We have some recommended actions, and so I'm going to open up the hearing and bring this back. But we do have 4 recommendations that are here today. And before I ask Paul if we have any questions for him, one is to open and close the public hearing to obtain input from the community on draft maps for consideration. Number 2, select one of the maps being considered, map C, map C2, D, or D2. Number 3, confirm ward numberings as proposed by staff or adjust numbering as desired. Note Ward 1, 3, and 5 will hold elections on November 3rd, 2020, and Wards 2, 4, and 6 will hold elections on November 8, 2022. And finally, number 4 is introduce the ordinance for the first reading and authorize publication of title requires 5 affirmative votes. And with that, does this council wish to hear a presentation from our consultant at this time, or would like any legal consideration from our attorney at this point? Yes, Councilman Solorio, and then followed by Councilman Benavides.
First, just the process, and I'll talk about the maps in a little bit. I know clearly for a variety of reasons we're to select a map tonight. The issue of timing of what ward goes when. I know that the settlement agreement was very specific about us identifying a seat that would empower Vietnamese and Asian American voters for that seat to be essentially on the 2020 ballot. It was silent on everything else. I know until I received some of the materials in preparation for this meeting, I yet wasn't really preparing to make a decision on which race goes with what election cycle. I know we did receive some input, including Mr. Helvig. Can that piece possibly be deferred to later, or in what ways is that so linked to the maps that they really have to be done at the same time?
And Mayor Pro Tem and Mayor Council Member Solorio, I would like to first mention that we do have our special legal counsel here this evening to answer specific questions, but it is a matter of process. We do need to you will need to make a decision as to when the different wards, as you draw the new maps, will go forward with the elections. We knew that as of tonight, but what we really thought you might do tonight is do the heavy lifting and take public comment. If we get 5 votes to move forward with a specific map in a first reading, then we will work with our special counsel and our consultant to bring you those issues in your second staff report for your second reading, so that they will happen simultaneously and be ready to go. What we didn't want to do this evening was to bring all of that information forward. We really wanted to have an opportunity to concentrate on the maps and to give you input. Again, if you do first reading tonight, we're going to work with our special counsel and consultant to give you all the information you need to then decide which ward will go first.
So we can make then the timing decision later. Not that tonight we can't begin to talk about it and maybe even decide, but we're not. That's not a critical decision.
We were just simply trying to keep the work load doable and to be able to give the public an opportunity to separate the issues.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Madam City Attorney, just quick clarification. Just say if you were to vote on a map and you have consensus, but during the second hearing, if that could change, so then what happens?
Again, it's a process-related question. When you say change,
say that you have 5 votes here today for one map, and then at the second meeting, say you only have 4.
We will need consistently to have the 5 votes for the first reading and the second reading. If there's a change during the second reading and 5 of you choose to support a different map, then we would consider that the first reading of that different decision.
Great. Just wanted to make sure that that was clarified. Great.
I just want to mention Ms. Barlow is here this evening in case you have any specific questions about the settlement.
Councilman Benavides, and then I'll move to Councilman Tinajero and then Councilman Sarmiento.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Also, process question for City Attorney. We've been making mention of the need for 5 votes per charter to adopt new ward maps. This is a process that we're going through as a result of a settlement agreement. I think you may have touched on this last meeting. But just to clarify for both us as a council, for the members of the public, if there were not 5 votes here tonight or at all to approve a map, a new boundaries, map new boundaries, what then are the implications to the city as a result of that, if we were not able to come together?
So as a matter of process, I'd like to break this down into 2 steps. I want to remind the council that we did enter into a settlement agreement, and in good faith, we need to pursue implementation of that settlement agreement. I think we have a duty to do that. If we were not able to achieve 5 votes this evening, my recommendation would be that we continue this matter to your next meeting, November 20th, and that we continue to try to get those 5 votes of support for as long as we can, and working with the plaintiffs to let them know that we are working on that process. If we reach a point in time, I'm very hopeful that this does not happen, where it does not appear that we can do that, then we would need to have a discussion with our special counsel, to have discussion with plaintiffs. But I think if we give this process a good amount of time and we look at it seriously, I'm hopeful that we can implement the settlement agreement that you all approved.
By way of the settlement agreement, that avoids us quite a bit of expense in litigation, right?
Yes, I mean, as you know, the settlement agreement is a public document. We did pay several $100,000s to settle this matter, and to go and proceed with litigation. I would let our special counsel give you an estimate, but I've been told that's upwards of $1 million to $2 million.
So hopefully we are able to come together to avoid that, even though this is not necessarily a perfect process, but it's one that we're trying to taking seriously, hear from the community, and be able to at least take a step toward going towards district elections and such, and try to remedy an issue. I want to thank all the members of the public who came out and spoke, as well as those who sent their communication via email. And it appears that there is a map in particular that is standing out, which I'm again appreciate the community's input, and certainly interested personally in looking at that map for consideration. But I'll heed to the chair and continue comments by my colleagues.
Great, thanks, Councilman Benavides. Councilman Tinajero?
I appreciate the maps that were given to us. I think we've taken a look at them. Personally, I just want to go ahead and make a motion to support Plan D2. And if there's someone with a second, we can continue discussion.
We have a second?
I'll second with comment.
Great, yes, Councilman Sarmiento?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. So I just want to get back to a little procedural housekeeping, Madam City Attorney. So I do agree with you in the sense that if for a second reading, if we deviate to a different map, it re-triggers, or it triggers a first reading. Because I think on a second reading, all we can do is make minor, non-material adjustments to the original motion on first reading. So I just wanted to clear that up. And changing the time would be considered a material change. So that's one. The second one is, let's just assume that we are able to select a map. And on Tuesday, the voters don't adopt the measure. So what does that, in looking at the settlement terms, it looks like, our point might be moot at this point, or our exercise to select a map may be moot. But maybe Kim, you can enlighten us and give us.
Yeah, to say, Councilmember, if you don't mind, I'd like to have our special counsel address that as she negotiated and documented our settlement agreement for you.
Good evening, Madam Mayor Pro Tem and members of the council. Kimberly Hall Barlow, special counsel. If the voters do not approve the ballot measure to change the charter to allow a different methodology, essentially, for selecting wards, then at that point, the plaintiffs would be able to enter a stipulated judgment with the court, and the court would be issuing an order requiring that you move forward with the change that essentially would be declaring that provision of the charter illegal. And it would require this council to move forward implementation of the revised boundary lines. So your process of choosing a map will not be moot. It will simply be a map that would then be implemented by the court rather than through the normal just public hearing process.
So our exercise on selecting the map will survive whether or not the voters adopt or they don't adopt the measure on Tuesday.
That's correct.
And we're not in breach of anything, of any of the terms of the stipulated settlement agreement, whether or not the voters decide one way or the other.
No, it was understood that the voters will make a choice. Obviously, the hope is that we wouldn't be forced into a situation where the stipulated judgment would have to be filed. But obviously, you can't be required to make your voters vote a certain way.
So conceivably, if we go before the court, or the court now manages the decision on whether or not we're going to find our charter provision illegal, it could straddle, I guess, both this council and maybe the new council that's going to be impaneled, right? Is there any requirement in the settlement that requires that this council oversee that change?
What we provided for was that you would do the selection of the map, and that map would take effect either on certification of election results approving the measure or upon entry of the stipulated judgment. So, but that of course does require that you select the map prior to the seating of a new council.
Okay. Thanks.
Can you repeat that last comment?
That this council, the current council, is authorized under the terms of the settlement agreement to select the map. It has to be done before a new council is seated, or we would technically be in breach of the agreement. Then we would probably have to go through additional public hearings with any new council members. We would probably have to seek a modification of some kind if that was possible. But this council was committed in the settlement agreement to implement the new district boundaries.
So just for clarification purposes, whether the voters decide to vote for this or not, or we have a new council coming in, it's really not up to the voters or this new council to really dictate what these wards or maps should be based on this lawsuit that is against this current council.
That is correct. You will have the option of selecting the boundaries for this ward. After the 2020 census, new maps will probably be drawn.
And that was going to be my next question, because I said, so say this council chooses this map, just for a hypothetical purposes, D2, we choose this map, and we have 5 votes here today, and then we have a second, and it goes through. 2020 comes along, we'll have this potentially only this map ward for really 2 years, and then there's a potential that there's going to be this whole new wards if the new council decides that they don't want to go this route.
Typically, adjustments that are made to the boundary lines following something like this, either a settlement agreement or a judgment. First of all, the terms of the settlement agreement require that any future boundary maps comply with the CVRA, comply with federal and state law. So there wouldn't be an opportunity to draw lines in such a way as to then divide the Asian American community. So what happens when we do redistricting after census is typically minor adjustments in the lines. Sometimes there aren't adjustments needed, but in a city of this size, you're likely to have enough of a variance in particular areas that there might need to be some movement of the lines. They're typically fairly small.
Okay, and I just wanted to clarify that. I think it's important for us to clarify that, because today I want to be honest with my colleagues. I wasn't planning on voting, but as I've taken a position early on that I wasn't favorable of moving in this direction, just for the mere fact that we were just taking one step versus doing a comprehensive approach and how we actually vote. It's plurality. And for me, I have a big problem with that, and that winner takes all in a kind of district voting. Typically, when it's district, it doesn't work well. And so I have a big issue with that, and that's the main reason why I didn't want to participate, because I feel that we should have done our due diligence and been able to put in a new voting process of how these folks would be able to really have the ability to understand that, look, you have an opportunity to run for office, but at the same time, we're not going to have 5 or 6 Latinos in a district and just say mere purposes of an African American or white person. And typically what happens, and we've seen this in other wards and districts where you kind of, and even here at an at-large election that we face here, when you have multiple candidates of the same, and it's winner take all, typically what happens is that we all split the vote, right? And now you're dealing with a smaller pool. And so, I believe that at the end of the day that, with old census, numbers, things are changing drastically, and we're seeing it with our housing and what kind of housing we've brought to this city. And there's just a lot of changes happening in this city fairly quickly. And I think, in my personal opinion, we should have waited to see, because I really believe that a lot of these, in particular in the downtown and the core of this area, it's changing. And it's been changing for the past 5+ years. And you see it with the numbers. And so as I move forward, and I know today we need 5 votes to move forward, I wanted to have clarity that this settlement or this lawsuit has nothing to do with the voters approving on ward elections, and nor does it have anything to do with a new council coming in thinking that they can go ahead and make changes based on, we don't approve this map. This council should have waited for this new council, and we don't understand why they took this vote. And I just wanted to bring that clarity, because I think it's 2 separate issues that you all are talking about here today, that I think the public, in many respects, is confused. And I just wanted to make sure that we understood that this is actually a lawsuit that is towards this council, not any future council, and or, again, for clarity purposes, whether the district elections award pass on November 6th. If it does, great. And if it doesn't, we still have an obligation, is what you all are telling us.
Correct.
Okay. So we have a first and a second. Is there any more discussion? Yes, Councilman Solorio.
Yeah. For me, probably the most important thing is just that we come into compliance with the California Voting Rights Act. I said that along that, once we saw the data, the data is strong and compelling, that we have been disenfranchising Vietnamese and Asian American voters, and so we got to do right by them and right by the law. In reflecting on, what's the perfect map, and there never really is a perfect map, I did begin to see that, the recent suggestions from OCO and some of the allies and residents organizing around that was very interested in protecting the Lacey neighborhood and the broader area, because there's comparable renters, comparable residents, et cetera. And then we got a flurry of letters from two Vietnamese, community sectors. The most recent flurry, I think, was with messaging very consistent with what Mr. Kin Nguyen shared, and I wasn't ever intending on putting a map forward, but I did realize that getting to 5 can be difficult. And I try to then figure out, okay, well, those are the main points of contention. How can we address both those types of interest in one map? And I saw that, you could modify map C into version C2 to still keep Vietnamese on both sides of the river, because there are a significant number on both sides. And in fact, C2 now, based on the number of overall Vietnamese and Asian American residents, has the most of any of the maps, and any of the other the other lettered sections. But then it also took into account that broader Lacey neighborhood. And I did speak personally maybe about a week or so ago with Miguel Hernandez from Oco to understand what the genesis of their interests were in creating map D2, and it had to do with keeping that broader Lacey neighborhood area, larger area, intact. So the map that I put forward does and accomplishes those two things, so that we can try to arrive at hopefully what will be 5 votes up here. I know that Oco, again, even though I think their main interest is about the Lacey neighborhood, they suggested that map C2 disenfranchise some Vietnamese American voters in the northwest section of the city. But I would argue that by the same logic, C2 is stronger than D2 because east of the river, there's many, many Vietnamese Americans. And when we think too about communities of interest, which is big, I know from personally having been here to most of these facilities and seeing the community interact, a big part of any community is the religious community. And so east of the river, you have St. Barbara, which is a very prominent Catholic church that Vietnamese Americans and Asian Americans attend. Our Lady of Labang, that actually this council renamed that church, in fact, and rebuilt some of it in support of that Vietnamese community, of which much of it is east of the river. You also have many Asian Americans that attend Christ Our Savior. And then you have several Buddhist temples, nice restaurants. So, the Vietnamese community and Asian American community, they're really on both sides of the river. And I think C2 really has, and, by numerical fact, the largest number of Vietnamese and Asian American residents of any of these maps. Also in C2, I heard often and clearly from my current constituents in Ward 3 that they'd like to have all of it north of 17th, and they did not want it to be divided. And some of the other maps, including D2, does take out some areas that are north of 17th, as well as some of the areas north of 17th that are in D2 are more affluent than the rest of the ward that includes Lacey. And then for the reasons of not dividing communities and neighborhoods, keeping north of 17th intact, I think is good and helpful. And I guess just as a closing point as well, I just wanted to reemphasize that Map C2 has about 13,000 Vietnamese and Asian Americans residents living there, which, as I understand, is about half of all of them citywide. So it is it does take that into account. And again, I think it addresses the idea of having the broader Lacey area all in one ward. So I just wanted to share the reasons why I move forward that plan to take into those things into account and to try to see how we might be able to get to 5 votes up here. Thank you.
Great. Councilman Sarmiento, and then followed by Councilman Tinajero.
Were you next? Councilman?
No, it was you. Then yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
No, yeah. Then
Got it. Thank you. So I appreciate the councilman submitting a map. That's helpful because that's what we wanted to encourage from everybody in the community to do. And I think to Ken's point, I think it's important to make sure that we are receptive and we understand what the Asian American population in the city supports. And I think there is support probably for many of these. This is a really imperfect science, is what I realized after speaking with Paul, our consultant, and going through the different iterations. It is very, very imperfect. And if you look at the standard deviations on all the maps, they're very narrow. There's just very little flaw that you can find, at least with the numbers and the quantifiable data in any of the maps. So at some point, any map will work, and any map will, I think, survive a challenge pursuant to the CVRA standards. So that's the good thing, is that we have maps, I think, that comply and that will provide the relief and will cure the problem that we have. But we also want to make sure that we don't do, as we're trying to address a concern with our Asian American voters, we don't want to do it to the detriment of other folks who have certain interests that are important as well. Because we're a community of residents of, that are considered a protected class. So, I think the arguments about homeowners and renters is very compelling to me. I mean, we have that dilemma, unfortunately, where we do have many, many tenants, many renters, and we want to make sure that, they're not bifurcated, and then their common interests are also lost in this discussion. So, when I see maps, the only problem I had with C2, or one of the problems I had, and I go back to something that Paul Mitchell, who addressed us at the last meeting, and you can sit down, Kim, because I don't think we have any questions. So because I want to speak to Paul. Well, you can look him in the eye, and but I think what you were saying, Paul, and when I saw Map D before D2 was drafted up, the more, I guess let me put it this way, the less tortured a map looks like, the better map it is. In other words, if you have things meandering and they sort of snake around and you have legs and, it looks like you're trying to gerrymander certain areas. And that's where I've seen, maps look really ugly and you wonder, how did they arrive at that? As opposed to having some very nicely, drafted, sort of quadrants or horizontal areas, and keeping neighborhoods together. So I really did like D, but then realizing that D2 was just a slight departure from that to make sure that we kept some communities of interest together. But on C2, I see that there's a leg here that I think it's District C that goes into District A as a sort of L shape on the west side of the river. That to me looks a little tortured. So, it looks like we're trying to make up, I guess, on some votes and on some numbers, but that's a kind of example that I think we're trying to move away from. And we can find that in D2 as well. We'll find like the triangle in, and I think what the councilman was talking about in his ward. But to the extent we can minimize that and make them smooth lines to the extent that we can, I think they're less subject to challenge. I think they're more fairly drawn based upon just numbers and grids. But I think to Mayor Pro Tem's point, finally, is this map is probably not going to be with us very long. Or, these districts, I think eventually after the 2020 census, we're probably going to revisit this again and make some adjustments that probably will look very similar to something in between these two maps. So, I'm very concerned about us kicking this down the road, and then we're all looking at each other on, November 20th or December 4th, and we're saying it's too late. We just breached the agreement, and now we're looking at a big ticket item when it comes to litigation costs. So that's my concern. I don't think any of us are going to walk away saying this is the perfect map and it solves all the problems. So.
But before we have an answer there, just a quick point. I had looked at that L-shaped area too, because a couple maps had that. That's the Santa Anita area. It's just an example of, for a reason of keeping communities of interest intact, that they went west of the river to keep the Santa Anita neighborhood, which is a historic Latino neighborhood, intact, and with a more Latino ward. And the opposite of that is that Map D2 instead puts that very historic Latino neighborhood with the Asian American neighborhoods. And so I looked at that and thought it made sense to keep those communities of interest with the right community, and ignoring the fact that the river's there.
Did you have a particular question, or would you just like for me to respond?
I just want to look you in the eye.
Okay.
Councilman Dinero?
Thank you.
Madam Mayor Pro Tem, I'd like to see if we can go ahead and take a vote.
I know we had a first and a second, so I'll go ahead and call the question. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Can we just do a roll call vote, please?
Councilmember Sarmiento?
Aye.
Councilmember Tinajero?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Martinez?
Aye.
Councilmember Benavides?
Aye.
Councilmember Solorio?
You can do it, council member. You can do it.
Well, I do feel that, as Councilmember Sarmiento says, that all of these maps, I think, are in compliance with the California Voting Rights Act, and I know that everyone was, pushed on their comfort zone, including our Mayor Pro Tem.
I'm voting here and I came here
so-
today, so.
That being the case, and the reality too that in the near future with the new census, there'll be an opportunity to make other adjustments. Whether the sales tax measure passes on election day, one way or another, like every large city, there's going to continue to be financial challenges. So I do have concerns with spending more money on attorneys and legal costs. Not that I don't like attorneys. But boy, four votes already. Not that I do not believe that. Well, maybe before I vote, to the extent that it's possible now, which it probably is, I do not understand what map D2 accomplishes for the communities that we've heard from that map C2 does not. For example, I did hear Councilmember Sarmiento very clearly mention that that little, what he called leg west of the river, that did look awkward, and that was a reason for some of his concern. But I think the response being that it was to protect the Santa Anita neighborhood and keeping it with like communities, that there was a strong logic there. I guess I'm open to going with some of my other colleagues here, but I'm just wanting to understand why.
Councilman Tinajero?
May I just, as I looked at the maps, one of the things that I noticed, as you know, I'm up on the ballot this year, so I actually went out to that west end and really canvassed it. And what I noticed on D2 was that the largest concentration of the Vietnamese population is on that side, west of the river. And so in C2, it actually cuts into the area over by Centennial Park, just on the other side of Edinger.
Yeah,
A does.
Yeah.
It kind of comes down.
Right.
So for me, that was...
But again, I think there's, I don't want to call it outright misinformation, but I think you got to really sift through and think about these things. So really, map C2 includes all that Asian American voter base west of the river. If anything, it adds to it. So there's no deconcentration of the Asian community in that map.
I agree. That there's not a deconcentration.
Right.
But what it does, it absorbs more Latino numbers down here. So I'm just telling you.
Right.
You're not hard set. I'm just saying.
And again, yes and no, because then if you look at the actual final total number of Asian American residents in both, there's more in C2. So by definition, if you will, we actually added more Asian Americans by going east of the river, and again are keeping Latino core communities like the Santa Anita neighborhood together in C2, whereas in D2 you're putting a historic Latino community that has felt disenfranchised for a long time. You're putting them in an area where now many of them will likely feel more disenfranchised.
So compelling arguments on both sides. We could probably debate this probably all night and still not come to some agreement, right? Paul, you've probably been to some of those conversations, some of those discussions. Can you tell us, I mean, as we were vested with this obligation to decide on a map, you know, have we achieved that with the maps that we have before us? And, you know, is there any disadvantage with, you know, B2 versus C2 or anything? Because I think that, you know, there's good arguments to be made for both maps, and I even like D. So I just didn't want to throw it in there because, look, then we get really messy, right? To the extent we can just narrow it down to 2, I think we've made some progress. So that was good that we're at least down to 2 maps. So, you know, I mean, is there, you know, what's your take on this?
I think you're right to say that you're vested with this obligation, and the discussion now is on your side of the dais. I think your attorneys and your staff and the hearings that you had and the community engagement are all reflected in the plans that you have, in particular D2 and C2, which were revisions of the original plans based on input. So, and each argument that's being made is being made in terms that are completely valid within redistricting. When you talk about the shapes of the districts, that's in redistricting world termed as compactness. And when other people are talking about the communities of interest that are in each district, that's another, in some cases, you know, way to look at a particular set of lines as being justifiable. So the conversation you're having is exactly the conversation that you would expect in this process, in a transparent process. And it is your obligation at this point to take what's been given to you and see if you can come to an agreement.
See, and what I've liked about both the maps, like you said, was that they've both been sort of, you know, versions of what we began with, and that was because there was public comment, there was opinion, there was folks that wanted to tweak it, and that's what I guess that's what you want out of these, you know, conversations. So, you know, at this point, I think, you know, we can beat it to death and, you know, maybe even tweak it a little bit more, but we're still not going to get any further if we just keep on not coming to some agreement amongst 5 of us. So, you know, I would just.
So I know we have a vote on the table. We're waiting for Councilman Solorio, but I'll go. I know Councilman Benavides, you have a quick comment based on.
And let me make one last statement here. I mean, I do feel like, and this is not just me because it's based off input that I received from the community, like via map D of C2, a good faith effort was made to address the various concerns out there. And I guess I've really yet to, from the dais, hear what's problematic with C2. So, you know, for me, they're not hearing much. I mean, I'm inclined just to vote no, which would be unfortunate, obviously. But again, I'm not hearing any compelling reason on what the problem is with C2. And again, I did it largely in part to try to achieve consensus and include the comments from the various main communities that we have in the audiences and letters. So I guess I'm just struggled with that idea for not.
And may I just only mention for Mayor Pro Tem as the chair of this meeting, if there's going to be further debate, just to make sure that we're carrying this right.
That's what I'm just trying to finalize.
We probably want a
Correct.
motion to go ahead and extend our debate so we can continue to have the conversation since the vote was.
No, I already
in
called for the
process.
question. I was just, that's why I went back to Councilman Solorio. If you're very quickly, Councilman Benavides, and then we just, I know we've already taken a vote, so.
Yeah, I just
We're
want to
just
make sure
waiting.
I'm not
Yes,
trying
correct,
to
exactly.
stop conversation. I just want to
Yes.
make sure that we're doing this in
Yes.
the right way.
Thank you both. And just I'll try to be brief here. My comment, and I appreciate the comments and Councilman Solorio's comments. In there isn't necessarily a perfect map, and this process isn't necessarily perfect. I definitely appreciate Councilman's efforts to address some of what he's heard and some of the additional, you know, just personal thoughts and trying to look at some of the numbers and such. And I know it's not an easy process to try to balance that out. So I'm sure it took you some time to do that. There was some comment. I prefer map D. I think some of my colleagues do as well. for the purpose of reaching consensus, recognizing that there isn't going to be a perfect map and that there will be within a couple of years an opportunity to revisit. Yet we have now the opportunity to follow through with the settlement of this agreement, put that behind us, and then start with a clean slate. I think for me that's where I'm willing, and I think some of my colleagues as well, to concede and settle on D2 for the purpose of moving this process forward. I think that the consultant as well ended up drafting D2 as a result of some of the direct public comment, public input, right? Several, multiple meetings and such. So that's also one of the things that compels me, in that there's been a variety of different meetings that's been independent of any feedback or input by council, but rather that resident feedback and input. So even though I personally prefer D2 seems to be what addresses some of the community input and feedback. So all that to say, not a perfect process. In a couple of years, we'll have an opportunity to revisit, or those sitting here anyway will. So the last comment with regard to the C2, I don't think there's a problem with it. The only thing that I do see that's more of that natural boundary there, the river, that would allow, I think there is a certain experience for those who live west of the river and those who live kind of a more central part of the city. So having a council member, ensuring that a council member lives in that part of town by way of having that award that has that natural river boundary, I think is one of the strengths that I see of D2, if you will, if we're looking at the two. So all that to say, you can make an argument on both sides. I would just compel you and implore you, Councilman, to consider helping us to resolve and bring the settlement this settlement agreement to conclusion so we can.
I think just as a courtesy, I will vote for it today, but I may not vote for it at the next meeting for the various reasons, because again, even Councilmember Benavides, your statement about that the demographer did map D2 the way he did based on input, it was really just a conversation around keeping the larger Lacey area intact, and C2 does that as well. And I heard a couple of my colleagues say their really favorite is map D. So then if that's really the case, why aren't you all supporting map D? So that's why I'm just kind of confused on then what the motivations or interests are, or what the problems are with map C2. In the meantime, I'll work with legal counsel to see, okay, on the second reading, how much changes, if any, we could make, including maybe going back and looking at C2 at that point. I know some of these things aren't crystal clear in terms of process and all
Councilman
that.
Solorio,
Yes.
I'm going to go ahead and call the question again.
If I could at least finish my statement,
Yes,
we're very generous with you and your time at many council members, so just give me a couple more minutes.
Well, we're in
just so I can wrap up.
violation. We are in violation now.
Mayor
We've
Pro
gone-
Tem, I would like a couple more minutes as a courtesy the way we continuously give you meetings. Please. Thank you. So I would like to continue to work with our city attorney just on process and what the various options are at the meeting where we have the second reading, because as has been mentioned before, you can make some changes, not many or significant, and this issue is obviously a very important one, and to the extent that we're not dividing communities, that would be a good thing. Thank you so much.
Madam City Attorney, just for clarification purposes, to make sure that this vote is going to count, I want to make sure that we're not in violation of any of the Robert Rules of Order.
Right. I would. You can move forward. You've allowed.
Or would you
the
like
debate
for
as the
me
chair.
to have everyone restate the vote?
I think there was a motion and a second.
Yes,
Right.
and we
were
then
calling
voted,
it.
and then we were
I would
waiting.
ask you to do your roll call again.
Roll call again. Great, thank you. Madam Clerk, can we please do a roll call?
Councilmember Sarmiento. Yes. Councilmember Tinajero.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Martinez.
Yes.
Councilmember Benavides.
Aye.
Councilmember Solorio.
Aye.
We have
All
5
those-
affirmative
Great.
votes.
Thank you. Yes, now 98, so now we're going to move towards council comments. Any comments? Councilman Sarmiento?
For brevity purposes, I'm just going to say good night.
Councilman Tinajero?
Good night.
All right, Councilman Benavides? Any comments?
Shop Santana, vote next week and have a good night.
Councilman Solorio?
Just want to thank all the participants. It's been a long few months on this, and government isn't always a straight line, but we're getting there. Thank you so much.
Go out and vote.
Great. So at this moment in time, now this meeting is adjourned. Next meeting is scheduled for November 6th. Actually has been canceled. So the next meeting of the City Council would be held Tuesday on November 20th at 5 p.m. Thank you.